Hey everybody, welcome back to Biblical Greek Made Easy. This is class 6 of module 2, and today we're going to start to learn the aorist, which is the second of the past tenses we're going to learn. And today we're going to start to learn the second aorist, which is all of the weird forms, okay, all of the stem changes. And we put those in one chapter for you, so we learn those all together. We learn that pattern, and it can be a little strange. But hey, here's the scripture verse I want to share with you today. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 2, Paul says to Timothy, "Preach the word. Be ready in season and out of season." Okay? And two ways to think about that. On the one hand, Paul's charge to Timothy, that may be, to some extent, why you've decided to take this Greek class, is to go deeper with the word, to be ready to preach to your people in a way that incorporates some of these Greek tools and goes a little bit deeper into the original language, and that's awesome. If that's you, I'm super excited about that. But just sort of in a jokey sort of way, that charge to be ready in season and out of season, that sort of models the way we need to pay attention to Greek verbs, is that we kind of got to be ready for everything sometimes. And so since this is a chapter where we're dealing with some of these weird forms, these stem changes, I thought that was a good reminder for us. Obviously, that's not what Paul really meant. I'm just sort of being humorous there. But be ready in season and out of season. We're going to see that today. And so that leads us to the tip of the day. The tip of the day is to get comfortable with different roots, okay? We think that that's strange, we think that that's weird, but that's just the way Greek does it for the pattern of words that we're going to see today. And so we just have to learn those, and I promise it's not that big of a deal. We've got a handout for you, we break it down. There's a very limited number of these verbs that show up 50 times or more in the New Testament, and so we're just going to deal with those as they come. And it won't be that big of a deal, I promise, okay? So that's what we're going to do today. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk about why this matters, okay? So aorist verbs are the most used tense for verbs in the New Testament. Like 34% of all the verbs that show up are aorist. So again, that's like a third, okay? Some scholars suggest that aorist is the default tense that we encounter in Koine Greek, and so it just shows up a lot. Okay, even these weird forms that we're going to talk about today, they show up really regularly, which again, that's good news and bad news. It's bad news because it's a weird form that shows up, but it's good news because you just learn it really quickly and then it's just no problem at all, right? The harder part is when you have a weird form that only rarely shows up because you don't get enough of a repetition to memorize it. Those are the real annoying ones, but aorists show up all the time. And as I mentioned, we're going to learn the irregular forms first, and then next chapter we're going to learn what we call first aorist. It's the original pattern, the normal pattern. We're learning the irregular pattern today, and you'll see why as we get into it, okay? So let's talk again about past tense verbs. We talked about this previously. Remember, in English, we kind of have this one simple past tense. Though aspect can change, we use these helping words to change what's going on. So these examples we gave you last time: I forcefully removed the rubber chicken from my ballroom tuxedo, versus I was forcefully removing the rubber chicken from my ballroom tuxedo. The first one is undefined action. It's completed action. It's not telling us much except that it happened in the past. The second one we would call continual action. I was forcefully removing, right? You get that continual action. The second example there is the imperfect, and that's what we learned last time. The past continual action. The first example, the I forcefully removed, that's the aorist. That's what we're going to call the aorist. So as we said before, the imperfect tense describes past continual action. The aorist describes past undefined action, okay? And that's what aorist is going to be for us. Now note, English has certain verbs that behave regularly, and it has other verbs that behave weirdly. For example, many regular verbs form their past tenses by just adding ed. So flip becomes flipped, okay? Block becomes blocked. Look becomes looked, right? We add ed to the end of the verb and we get the past tense. However, there's other verbs that form their past tense more irregularly, right? So eat, for example, doesn't become eated. We don't just throw ed on the end. It becomes ate to be proper, okay? So eat becomes ate. So we actually have a completely different word there to represent the past tense of eat, okay? So Greek is going to have words like this too. And that's essentially what we're going to be talking about with the second aorist. So the Greek aorist, or undefined tense, is past undefined action. It tells you that the action happened, but not much else, okay? So for example, I did, okay? Past tense, but it's not telling us if it was going on. It's not telling us anything more about it. It's just kind of like the simple past tense. All right, so I want to include one more note here that's just kind of for the language nerds out there, okay? If you don't care about language nerdery, for like 30 seconds, you can kind of space out, think about fantasy football, think about your knitting class that you're going to do later, stuff like that. But just 30 seconds of language nerdery here. So notice that Mounce distinguishes between the perfective, which is a grammar term, okay, and the punctiliar. And we're not going to worry too much about these words because these can get confusing. But perfective is like what we just saw, the I did, and the punctiliar is like a specific moment in time, right? So in English, I did could be understood as I did at this specific moment in time in the past. Okay, and that's not what's going on with the aorist. And so Mounce is distinguishing between those just so we know the difference and what's being said, even though in English it can be a little bit muddy. Okay, Mounce explains this in more detail on page 248. If you're following along in the book and you want to read, that's fine. I just want you to know that within the scholarly conversation, this goes a little bit deeper, and grammatically there's a little bit more going on. For the first year Greek student, though, you really don't need to know it. All right? So let's go ahead and bring it back, come back from your fantasy football team and your knitting class and all that kind of stuff, and we'll keep going. The main point I want you to take away from this is that we're going to translate aorist as I did. Imperfect, we've seen before, as I was doing. It's that past continual action. But aorist, whether we're talking about first aorist or second aorist or whatever, it's that I did. It's that past undefined action. Okay? Now, Greek has two different ways to form the aorist. First aorist is the more regular form. That's what we're going to learn next time. Second aorist is the irregular form. That's what we're going to learn right now. Okay? Now, both of those forms of aorist are going to be translated exactly the same. Okay? So we're not going to translate those differently. And a verb will either be first aorist or second aorist, but not both. Okay? It's going to follow one of those patterns, but not both, okay? So for example, sometimes for the word eat in English, there's not times where we say eated and times where we say ate. Like, it's just always ate, right? And so that's the same type deal going on here, is that a verb's either going to be first aorist or second aorist, but not both. Now notice I have an asterisk there, okay? There's two words that you already know that are annoying in the sense that they are exceptions to this rule, okay? So grapho and apostello. Grapho means I write. Apostello means I send. These are exceptions in the sense that the active is first aorist and the passive is second aorist. Okay? I promise this is not common, okay? This is just weird, okay? And that's why I put these on here for you right now. I don't want to lie to you up front. I want you to know that there's these two oddballs that don't follow this rule. But other than those, for the most part, the rest of the verbs we're going to deal with are going to follow one pattern or the other, okay? Now, here's some good news. There are only 26 second aorist verbs that are used 50 times or more in the New Testament, okay? Period. That's good news. That means if you devote some time to learning those 26 words and what their stem changes look like, this problem goes away for you, and you've got this mastered. You got this licked. Okay, we have a handout of all of these and their forms that show up in the New Testament for you available on the site, okay? So I'd suggest you print that out. You spend some time looking over it. You don't know all of those words yet, but you know 16 of them if you're following along with the vocabulary. 8 new ones are this chapter, okay? So half of the second aorist that you know, you're learning this chapter, okay? You can also see Mounce's list on page 462. Those are 2 different places to see all of this information, but very important to be aware that even though these are weird, it's a limited number of weird things it's a small enough list that we can master it, okay? Now let's go ahead and build these, okay? Let's build the second aorist active indicative. Okay, we start off with an augment. Why do we do that? Well, aorist is past time, so an augment indicates past time. Remember, it's on the left side of the word over there, so it's kind of like going back on the timeline, that sort of thing. So we put the epsilon, the augment, out front. And then we use the aorist active tense stem. Now notice, this is the first time that we're starting with a stem that looks different than the present tense stem, okay? We've seen a handful of places, like in the future, where there was a different stem that it used, but as a rule, this is the first time that we just start with a different stem. And that is the identifier, the calling card for second aorist, is that it will be built on this different stem. It will have this stem change. That's how you'll know that something is second aorist, is you'll notice that the stem change happened, okay? So augment plus the aorist active tense stem, then a connecting vowel, and then our secondary active personal endings, okay? So for example, a verb like lambano, I take or receive, its modified stem is that it loses that mu in the middle there, okay? So rather than lam or lamb, it just becomes lab. That mu falls out and we just get lab as the stem, okay? So we get elabamen, okay? So the challenge then, the goal, is to look at that and recognize that the lexical form is lambano, okay? Once we do that, the difficulty is over, okay? But that first step of recognition is really important. Now, this is an example where the second aorist stem is actually really similar to the present tense stem. It's just one letter different, okay? Sometimes they'll be really close like that. Sometimes they won't look anything alike, okay? So here is the paradigm with the endings on it. You already know these endings. These are secondary active personal endings, exactly like we saw with the imperfect. And you see there elaban, elabes, elabe, elabamen, elebete, elaban. Okay, first person singular, third person plural, still the same, but the exact same endings we saw with imperfect. Okay? So how are we going to tell the difference between imperfect and second aorist? It's the stem change. That's the way that we know. Okay? Let's do a sentence to practice here. I'll put it on the screen here and I'll let you read it, and then I'll read it after you. All right, good. How'd you do? Let's give it a shot here. Elaben un tus artus ha Iesus. How are we going to translate this guy? Okay, well, we want to identify the verb first, and we see elaben there, okay? And we'll go ahead and parse it. We look in the middle, we notice the lab, that this comes from lambano. We look to the left, we see the epsilon there on the left, which looks a lot like an augment to us, and we see the ending there. So this is second aorist third person singular of lambano. So it's going to mean he, she, it took, okay? It could be received as well. He, she, it received, but it's got to be past undefined action, okay? So he took, therefore. Now, once we know our verb, we're going to look for a subject. I see Iesus there all the way at the end, but that's clearly our subject, right? Because it's got our nominative definite article. It's got the nominative Iesus there. So we're going to pull Jesus there to the front. So Jesus took, and then un is therefore. Then we have tus artus, that's accusative for the loaves, or the bread loaves, or something like that. Okay, so Jesus took the loaves is what this means, okay? And that's what our translation looks like. That's maybe a little slower than we would want to go, okay? We would want to kind of recognize those pieces and be translating that whole time. But as far as our verb goes, we want to recognize that verb. We want to go through those steps of that verbal recognition system we told you, right? So we identify the lexical form, we look to the left, we look to the middle, we look to the right, and we go from there, okay? So where's the difficulty with second aorists? It's really memorizing that lexical form and stem combo, okay? So a couple examples here. Lego is going to become apon in the aorist, okay? The second aorist. Lego means I say. Apon means I said, okay? You'll see the third person singular apen with an epsilon nu on the end. You'll see that a ton in the New Testament, apen, and Jesus said to him, that sort of thing. How do you remember that Lego and apon are the same word. They come from the same lexical form. You just have to memorize it. Now, luckily, that word shows up so many times that, I mean, you may know it already if you've spent some time in the New Testament, just because it's so common. But it just shows up a lot, and so you'll learn it really quick. Here's another example. Balo. You see there, ebelon. We've added the augment. We still have the double lambda. That middle form there is actually the imperfect. So balo means I throw. Ebelon means I was throwing. Notice the form on the right there. Ebelon, we've got the augment, but we've got only one lambda instead of two. That's our stem change, okay? So the form on the right is the second aorist, okay? That means I threw. Not I was throwing, but I threw. Now notice the difference there between the imperfect and the second aorist is one letter, okay? So that can be kind of tricky. Now again, this shows you two examples. In one case, they don't look anything alike. In the other case, they look almost identical. They're one letter different that's easy to miss, okay? So this is the challenge. This is the difficulty of second aorist, is that you get both of these extremes, okay? You get the tricky forms trying to hide and look like other forms, and then you get the ones that just look completely different, okay? Note, the second aorist will always have a stem change. That's how you will distinguish it from the imperfect. Remember the handout. That's really the best place I can direct you, is to remember the handout. All right, let's talk about second aorist middle indicative, okay? Now notice that this is not second aorist passive. We're gonna learn the aorist passive later on when we learn some other passives that are formed similarly, like future passive, for example, okay? But we wanna learn the second aorist middle, and it's really pretty easy, okay? It's gonna be that augment out front. It's going to be that aorist active tense stem, which is exactly what we would expect, connecting vowel, and then the only difference is we're going to have those secondary middle passive personal endings, okay? These are the same ones that we saw before, okay? So, genomai on the right there, the stem change, it goes from a gamma iota nu to a gamma epsilon nu. This is one of those subtle changes that you got to look for, okay? So we get agenamain. We've got that first person singular, secondary, middle passive ending on there, and we get agenamain, okay? And remember, this is a deponent, and so this isn't actually a middle, this is going to be a deponent, right? So agenamain means I was. Genomai means happen, become, or be. It's a to be verb. Could be I happened, but probably I was. Could be I became as well, something like that, okay? It has some range, but it's a to be verb, which we see a fair amount. Here's the second aorist middle paradigm for you. Look up and down that. We got agenamain, egenu, egeneta, egenamatha, egenestha, and egenanta. Okay? So same endings, augment on the front. We recognize the stem change, we recognize the lexical form, and we just kind of go from there, okay? That third person singular, by the way, for the second aorist middle of genomai, egeneta, really common word in the New Testament, okay? It'll start out new sections a lot of times in the Gospels, and essentially it means he, she, it happened, or he, she, it became, okay? When it's used as like a transition, an introduction, it's going to be like, and it came about, so you'll see, it came about in those days, John was baptizing in the Jordan River, that sort of thing. Egeneta, it came about. We're going to see that a number of times when we read the Gospels, okay? So that's a really common word. Let me just flag some tricky words for you here, okay? Two of these you know, one of these you're going to learn in the future. But that word we just saw, genomai, okay? It's a deponent, and it means happen, become, or be. It becomes agenamain in the aorist, okay? Like I said, it's deponent, so it's always going to have those middle passive endings. Gnosko, we've seen before, okay? It's also going to be second aorist, and it's going to have a stem change. And so the aorist of gnosko, which means I know, by the way, K-N-O-W, becomes egnon. So notice the stem change there is that it loses the iota, and the gamma nu are right next to each other. And then the third one, this is the one you don't know yet. Genao means I beget or I give birth to. Okay, so if it's a father, if it's a male, it means beget, like to father a child. If it's used for a woman, it means to give birth, to bear. Okay, this is the one word that's a first aorist on this list, and so you haven't learned that form yet, but that's the first aorist form that's up there. But I put these all up there because they're all gamma nu words, okay? They all start with gamma vowel nu, and students really struggle to tell these apart, okay? So I can give you a few hints, okay? So in genomai, the way you can recognize that is it's going to be deponent, okay? So it's regularly going to be that middle form. We're going to see that a lot, okay? You see the lexical form of genomai there, okay? We also have to remember that stem change from gin to gen, okay? We got to have that drilled into our brains. The second one, gnosko, it's the only one that's going to lose that vowel and have the gamma nu next to each other. So if you see a gamma nu form that has that gamma nu right next to each other without a vowel in the middle, you 100% know, again, assuming it's one of these gamma nu words, you 100% know that it's gnosko. Okay, that's the way to find that one. And it's probably the weirdest of the bunch. It's going to have some weird forms that we just got to be aware of. Ganao, even though you don't know this one yet, I'll give you the trick on that one. It's the only form that's going to have the double nu, okay? I think about it as like the double peace sign, okay? It's got those two nus right next to each other. That's the only one of the three. None of those other two are ever going to have double nus right next to each other. So if you see a gamma nu word and you're struggling to understand which one it is, if you see the double nu, you know with 100% certainty that it's ganao, okay? So we'll review those from time to time. Those are probably ones to put on that back page of the tricky verbs just because you want to make sure you don't confuse those with one another, okay? All right, let's do some review. We did an introduction into the aorist tense. The bonus video for this week will talk through all of those second aorist forms. We'll make sure you're up to speed and understand what's going on with those, but spend some time with that. We learned the second aorist forms, okay? That's the weird forms, the odd ones, the ones that don't conform to the normal rules, but change their stems. That's what we learned this time. We learned the first part, the first chunk, even though we call it second aorist, we learned that first because it's so similar to imperfect. We learned the irregular forms of the aorist tense. Remember, the aorist tense, that's the most used tense for verbs in the Greek New Testament. Okay? So, good work today, guys. I'm proud of you. You did really well. Keep studying. The more you look over this stuff and you get comfortable with this, it'll make more and more sense. So happy studying, friends. We will see you next time.